right, let's call the meeting to order. It is November 7th, 2019. This is the Grafton Sustainability Commission, and we have a few members absent tonight, but we're going to go through what we have for first, the benchmarking data that we were to gather, particularly on the municipal side. I know there was some additional stuff on the school side as well, but why don't we do the municipal side first? And then before I get into that, I had handed out a Sustainability Commission outline because I got to thinking about, where are we going from here? The benchmarking was the first and most important part, and it sort of gave us perspective on where we are relative to what other communities are doing. But the next part of it is really the substantive part and the part that's going to require a little bit more heavy lifting from people in terms of data gathering around town. And what we've been able to do, I think, so far is collect a lot of data on other municipalities about how they work quantitatively. But when we get into our further breakout groups for municipal and Grafton operations, it's going to be a lot more qualitative. Talking to department heads, talking to people on the school side, talking to people in DPW, people in the administration about things like the municipal costs, things like school costs, and our revenue streams, our capital cost structure, and then finally our decision structure. So I had put together an outline here that I think it's aggressive, but I think also doable. So after we go through benchmarking today, we should talk about subcommittee assignments. And even though there are people that aren't here, we're going to have to assign people to different subcommittees. And then I was looking at establishing the subcommittees tonight, and then data collection on the subcommittees for the next couple of weeks. We'll have a follow-up meeting, and then we'll get into interviews with, let's talk about who we think we want to talk to, what our goals are going to be for achieving each report, because each subgroup is going to come up with their report about, municipal cost structure, school cost structure, et cetera. And then we would want to have a draft of initial findings due January 3rd. Now, we can talk about the January 3rd date because it's like no one's going to want to do a whole lot of work that week. I understand that. So if we want to push that out a little bit too, that's perfectly fine. It could be January 10th, could be the 17th, but we don't want to go too much further. And then after that, we would like to get into, I thought the decision and control structure subcommittee would come after that, because what we really want to outline for our final report is how are the pieces working together as a whole. I think that if you talk to people in the school committee, there's very little that they would change about the way the school committee works. They really like Jay, they really like their teachers, they really like their administration, they like how it works. It's just nobody ever has enough money. And if you talk to people on the municipal side, certainly people on my board really like how Tim works in municipal center. Some employees are happy, some are not, but everybody on that side really likes how it works. And then for some reason, when it all comes together, every year or so, we get together on the municipal side and the school side, and everybody's like, oh, what are you guys doing? And, well, what are you doing? So we want to be able to evaluate, okay, how are these pieces fitting? And, how is that impacting policy, and how is that impacting finances of the town? I think a lot of that is going to come from our interviews that we'll be doing over the course of the next month. So that when we get to finalizing reports on capital, schools, municipal, and revenue, each of us will be able to say, yeah, I sat with Jay, and this was his input, and I sat with some other people, this was their input. And then probably assign a subcommittee for that with follow-up questions for the stakeholders, and see if we can't get some good and honest information out of them about how they feel it's going. We'll talk more about it as we assign that work in January, but we could be thinking about, what will be the best way for us to get information out of people candidly. It's awfully difficult when people think, well, I'll tell you what I think, but you're just going to go back and put it in a report, and then I'm going to be on blast. Like, we don't want that. So there should be some assurance of anonymity and ability to speak freely granted to whomever that we do talk with, and we will probably want to emphasize that. So we'll get into that. I think the decision and control structure report will probably come after we do all the rest of the reports. And I had a draft of initial findings for that due February 28th. Then I was thinking about public outreach. So after we gather this information, what we want to start to do is bring it to the public through a number of forums that we'll have in March. I would want to do one in South Grafton, I would want to do one in North Grafton, I would want to do one in the town center, perhaps at the school, and we can think about what those programs are going to look like. And then the final report would probably be due by the end of March. We can be writing while we're getting input from the public about how they feel about whatever it is we're finding. So that's the timeline, if that looks cool to everybody else. All right. So what do we have, Barry, on the municipal side for benchmarking updates? I didn't get a chance to look at your spreadsheet. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it's, all I did, I don't know if you can even read that.
I'll turn off.
I took your initial memo.
Okay.
Oh, jeez. Oh.
No one get up and move around, because that's unsafe.
Mine is buried.
Down the side, I
Okay.
took you, the data points you identified in your original memo.
Yep.
And I added a few things. Growth percentage under a number of things. How many staff in the police department, how many staff in DPW, blah, blah, blah. Just to be data points. Now, and I took the information that we had already collected from the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, a lot of that stuff, and plop that in. So for example, the actual levy for the year, I think it's 18, I took out of there. There are gaps. The Chapter 70 growth rate, the Chapter 90, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. We can find those for most of these towns. But what can I say? Am I at the top here? Hello. Yep. So here's
Okay, there you go.
Here's our towns. Here's who's chasing them. And here's the demographics that we're trying to, one of our, what do you call it? One of our touch points for comparing blah, blah, blah. I thought it would make sense, this is something you didn't have in your memo, to break out seniors, school age, and other.
Good idea.
Because I've heard the comment, well, we have a lot of seniors in town, and they are having trouble staying in Grafton, they want to stay in Grafton, blah, blah, blah. So how many do we have, and are there things that we would suggest or consider doing that would help to ease some of their issues? All of the property value comparisons, residential versus commercial, we know that these are important comparison points, because when we boldly compare ourselves to Shrewsbury, we see that they have, what, $5 billion in residential value,
Right.
and we have about half that. Okay, that starts to feed later decisions that say, they've got a bigger tax base. And
Well, that's a really interesting data point.
so, yeah, and I was just talking with Jack. If there are comparisons really for the data points, one is population, and another is the property values. All of, and breaking these out, where makes for worthwhile comparisons. But I'm going to jump ahead and say comparisons are nice.
Yeah.
Comparisons are needed. What we want to do is try to identify what do these other towns do that gets them in trouble with property two and a half,
Prop 2.5, right.
overrides.
Right.
What do they do that helps them avoid those kinds of things?
That's right.
Are they charging for false alarms for the fire department?
Right.
Are they putting up toll gates at their town so that if you want to go from Westboro into Grafton, you have to pay? Just a little humor before I.
Someone's going to bring that up in the revenue side.
But, okay, so Where,
Do we have a sense of like with the other towns and how they're doing with the overrides? Like, have we looked at that at all?
that we need,
Is that one
not
of the
yet,
points that will, yeah.
but on the municipal side, Martin and Laura and myself, we had dug out the budget books and the financial statements from those surrounding towns, and we've plopped them in there. Now we gotta read through them and identify how they're doing things.
So
A little buried, it feels like.
it is, well, so intentionally so, right? So Shrewsbury passed, we were in a race to, not like a race, but around the same time in 2014, Shrewsbury was looking for an override to pass, and so were we. I think we got ours.
Yeah, and they
Did we get ours first, or it was around about the same time, and they had been fighting for one for a while, and now the rumor has it they're coming back. One of the difficulties is, as we experience here in town, there is a propensity for municipal leaders to say, no, it's fine. We're fine, we're good, we're fine. And it's going to be hard to find. And it's hard to find in our town, right? And we're doing this for Grafton. What we have to be a little bit careful of is we can't be doing a GSC, a mini GSC for each town, each municipality that we're comparing ourselves to figure out what their deal is, just so we can figure out what our deal is, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it definitely is worthwhile to dig into what they are.
Sure.
Just as they spell out in their budget book.
Yeah.
And
So-
it's usually comprehensive and a pretty good source of information.
Have you found that most budget books do have a lot of that information, and towns are fastidiously publishing that
The
information?
ones I poked into, yes,
Okay.
yes. There are also towns that are doing whatever you want to call it, sustainability exercises.
Yes.
Or master plan, or financial plan. Westboro, I think, just did one. And
Yeah.
there's a couple of others that have done that. But having the data will let us say, for example, do we really pay more in property taxes per dollar of assessed value?
Right.
Do we? If we do, how does that compare with other towns?
Right.
I have found that there are some towns that surprisingly, when you look at single tax rates versus multiple tax rates, there are some that charge a significant chunk for commercial as opposed to residential.
That's right.
And the others don't. What's this? New device connected. Oh, somebody's poking at me. So,
Russians.
yeah. So in general, you'll notice, here's what I call the demographics on the top. And then here's the gazintas, the 4 revenue streams: taxes, state aid, local, and actually I only have 3 there. The local includes the 2 others. And this is the total revenues. All of these numbers need to be validated just to be sure.
Yeah.
Because I found one that was noticeably, it was not wrong for the specific time frame, but it was wrong when you try to compare one versus another. And that was in debt service for us. It said debt service was enormously higher than what we really.
Yeah, we had mentioned that last time, right?
So, but it doesn't mean that me, Laura, Mark, and Martin. That's what happens when you get to a certain age. Need to validate all of these numbers. And I tried to identify the fiscal year that we're talking about as well as the source. But I mentioned demographics on top, and then all the revenues, and then underneath is all the expenditures.
And on the revenues, if, like, all of those as a percentage of total would help to compare across, like, the local revenue as a percentage of the total, because
Oh,
the
yes.
numbers are
I
so
got you.
crazy.
Okay.
You know, that it's hard to look at that and say, well, so we have 8,000, 8 million, like, what does that mean compared to 26 million, but as a percentage of the total, it might make more sense.
Yes, yes, okay, we can make sure we get that in. There are a couple that I don't, fixed costs was in there, I don't know what that is. All the expenditures, everything we spend money on, and this one I started to open up even further. For example,
Oh, that's awesome.
there's some goodies here, whatever they say. I don't know what fixed costs are. Intergovernment usually refers to, I don't know, you're sharing somebody with a proprietary operation, like your enterprise fund. Things along those lines. That would have to be nailed. The compensation and some of the other issues, salary scales, that's something that we need to chase down. Issues around free cash as a percentage of what? Stabilization money, and how long, I think a good number would be, how long do we think the stabilization would last if everything went to heck? And then some of the general questions that you had, like, do they do long-term projections?
Yeah.
What is the, what are the staffing counts for some of the municipal operations, et cetera?
So can I ask I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of blanks here, and we're even talking about additional data points we could be putting in addition to these. And for citizens with full-time jobs, this is an enormous undertaking for the municipal team. So would it be prudent for us to look at the kind of the big numbers you already have and identify where Grafton's an outlier? Because if we're right on par with every other comparable town, odds are we're probably not going to find an enormous savings to be had there, and things like that, versus ones where we're significantly higher or significantly lower, to identify there, well, where are we seeing a difference compared to other towns? Because I just worry we can keep collecting more and more and more data, but it's going to create more questions than provide answers.
Agreed.
Good point. Well, it's up on the GSC Google Docs page.
Because you guys have already done a tremendous amount of work here.
Yeah.
But I wonder if the next step is really just analyzing what we do have here and seeing what we can answer from that.
Very.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's talk for a couple of minutes about what the end goal ought to be for benchmarking.
Oh, right.
Sorry.
Wow.
So the idea behind the benchmarking report, I think, is to provide a general overview of where we are relative to other communities within a reasonable degree of certainty. So every community is unique. It has its own needs. It has different people. It has different aging populations. It has different intersecting routes. It has different safety concerns. So it's, as we mentioned when we first began the exercise, it's really hard to find a community that is going to be just like us, so that we can say, like a control community, right? Like, here's your community with 20,000 people in it that educates its students, paves its roads, provides for its seniors, and doesn't need an override. So you can say, okay, well, what are they doing that we're not doing? That community doesn't exist.
Right.
So what we want to be able to do with the communities that we have identified is say, okay, are we, big picture, 10,000 foot view, are we an outlier in any one particular thing? What's jumping out at us? So if we were to say, okay, we spend, I can't remember what the police budget is. Let's say it's $10 million. If we spend $10 million on police and everybody else is spending 5, then we would say, okay, well, maybe there's something to look at there. But if everybody else is either understaffing or, it hasn't, it has a higher crime rate and they're not doing a very good job, then that's not an outlier. So I think what we probably ought to do going forward when we start to draft the benchmarking report is to be able to outline what we think the important data points are, where we feel like we are an outlier, if anywhere at all, and if we're not an outlier, if anywhere at all, based on those data points, be able to confidently point that out to people. So, for instance, what people are always saying is, when we talk about overrides or libraries or DPW buildings, oh, they're taxing us to smithereens. All right, well, that's relative. And as, Tim does like to say, and it's funny to point out, okay, are you really putting your house on the market to move to someplace that taxes you $500 less a year? Because that's not a moneymaker for you. That's going to cost you, it'll be years before you recoup that cost, if ever. So where are we, as far as burdens and benefits goes? So Barry, why don't we, me, you, who else wants to be on the team to draft the municipal benchmarking study? don't all yell out at once. That's fine. So
It's
me,
hard because the rest of us were on school and we're like,
Yeah.
"Well, I'm already comfortable with the school parts.
so let's let me write this down because I'll forget.
I'm texting with Mark to see where he wants to go with this. I think he wants to end up in revenues.
Municipal benchmarking will be me, Barry, and I'm gonna make Mark do a lot of the writing because
For
he's missed 2 meetings in a row now.
Are you talking about these subcommittees on this paper, or are you talking about
No, just the
setting
benchmarking.
questions, like
Yeah,
the-
yeah, so
Okay.
what we want to do is, with this benchmarking study, is just really on a sort of the level that we've got it here. Here's where Grafton is, here are the data points that we've identified as being crucial data points. Here are the numbers.
Yep.
Take from that what you will. And then, once we get into the other subcommittee work plans, we'll be able to provide context
Yep.
for the rest, for
When you
what we're doing.
identify crucial data points,
Yes.
what does that mean?
So what are the data points that, that,
Where are we in outliers,
yeah,
right?
yeah. What have we identified, and Barry, honestly, this is a lot of your work. What have you identified that you think is crucial up there where we ought to focus citizen attention to or voter attention to? We'll take population, break that out with, like you just said, we'll take property value, tax bill, gross domestic product to the extent that we have it, or, basic income. Do we have it? We have income,
Per capita?
per capita income.
Yeah.
Why did I say GDP? Per capita, that's what I meant. Demographic information that we've broken out.
Population. Yeah.
Yep, all that stuff. And then I think, what else? I just want to be able to take your chart that we had right there and break it up into about 5 or 6 different ones.
Debt service.
Yes, yep,
I like that chunk that appears at the top of the budget that says, here's last year's tax levy plus 2.5%.
yep,
Here's new growth, here's debt exclusion, and here's our total that we're gonna raise in taxes.
yep.
And then there should be some explanation of the millage rate that gets our taxes.
So that's crucial, to be able to see that other people are growing their tax base and their revenue stream, they're taking on debt, and they're having to pay for that as well.
Yeah, and what we have, and this is in the back of the budget, it's the last page, tab 8.
Mhm.
A very nice, clear statement of the last couple of years, this is what we've had. And from that, we can derive percent changes.
Okay,
Property taxes aren't gonna change that much, but that's easy to derive.
right.
New growth, are we bringing in new growth? Are other towns?
Right.
Are we Westboro with a new $40 million?
Just read that on the way home.
Amazon robotics, blah, 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 right around the corner from where I used to work. Damn, should've stayed. And debt exclusion. How
Right.
we very cleverly, I think, are able to collect more taxes because we throw some things in as debt exclusion. Which always makes it sound like, well, it's excluded from debt, you're not gonna have to pay it.
Right.
No, you're paying it,
Right.
you're just adding to your taxes. Would be interesting to see if other towns, how aggressively other towns do that.
It would be interesting to see how other towns are paying for capital that way, as far, instead of, a lot of people do what we do, is you pay for it out of free cash for minor capital items, but there's some items that are just so big, you'll
Yeah.
debt exclude a fire truck, for instance. So percentage debt exclusion to overall tax burden would be an interesting one. Because as I tell people, when you're writing your tax check, you're not writing it, okay, here's one check for debt exclusion, here's another check for schools, here's another check for municipal work. You don't care. You just know that you're billing up. like after the last override, all of a sudden there was a sewer facility improvement that, oops, we didn't talk a whole lot about as we were leading up to the override. And everybody's like, well, what the hell, you know, but, oh, well, it's a separate thing. Well, not to me, I'm just writing one check.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's gonna be more of that.
There is.
And that's what I see as really the ultimate outcome of this. We can establish the base for everybody else to understand. And then ultimately, we're going to say, well, we're gonna go to a couple more full-time people on fire.
Right.
I forget the number. The EPA, DEP have said, you're gonna have to do something with wastewater
Yeah.
that flows off your street, down your lawn, picks up the fertilizer you put down there, and goes into the Blackstone
Right.
or the Misco. You're gonna have to identify all that, and you're gonna have to control that.
Right.
Some of it's gonna be simple. At the end of a pipe, you're gonna have to put some stuff. Others are gonna be kind of expensive, and we've already paid for a study.
Right.
There's gonna be costs on that. So if the town continues to grow, we know we are relatively under for the number of police we have for Grafton. A lot of peaceful people here. But are they gonna have to add? Buildings, we have a lot of capital buildings. They have roofs. And as we've learned, those roofs don't last forever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that stuff is gonna have to be identified and thrown up against the wall and say, well, how are we gonna pay for all of that? And invading Millbury,
Right.
it's not gonna work.
Besides, if
So-
you're gonna invade, go east. Invade east.
Westboro?
Millbury's west, yes.
Okay. Yeah, but they've got Blackstone shops.
Right. Oh, that's true.
They're getting Amazon money.
Westboro's getting Amazon, yeah. Westboro is just $4.95 Mass Pike,
It's perfect.
and grass and
Right.
land, and a very good football team, and good, nice
But the
facilities.
other thing we need to highlight to people, our community, when we share some of these numbers and people say, well, everything's better in Westboro, and we say, well, they have all this other stuff. We have to remind people there's a reason they moved to Grafton, or at least
Right.
I know why I moved to Grafton,
Right.
because I didn't want to live in Westboro.
Right.
I wanted to live in a small town. I love Westboro. I
Right.
go there when I need to, but I wanted to live in a small community.
Right.
And one of the issues with that is we have less business here. And
So there is a premium that
Right.
you end up paying in terms of your municipal tax base in order to live in that environment. Luckily, on the flip side, there was also a discount when I moved here for housing. It was, the homes were just cheaper. So that, there are trade-offs abound. And that's part of what, not to go beyond benchmarking, but to get into, again, the municipal cost structure, Barry, you're right. When we talk about what our costs are per department, part of the conversation is going to be, okay, where is the police department going? Based off of where we see our population going and the demographics that we have. We can't, I know the school department tries to do it to predict school population. But it's we can figure out roughly, I think, where we're gonna be in population. Are we gonna need full-time fire? Well, there's a committee working on that, and we'll have to talk to them as well. So the municipal work plan is gonna be, it's gonna be some work. It's gonna be detailed. We'll get into that on that part. So do we have tax rate down on the data points? Okay. You and Mark, let's take a stab at drafting the initial municipal side benchmarking report, and then on the school side benchmarking report, is there new and additional data that you guys have collected since the last time?
So we've only mostly collected data for additional towns.
Okay.
I didn't add it. Did you add any data points? I didn't add any actual
No, that's what I meant, yeah.
new points.
Yeah.
We just did additional towns.
Okay. Which ones is, I can't remember.
Shrewsbury, Millbury, and
Sutton,
Sutton.
Okay.
Westboro.
Yeah, it's the same ones.
It was to add comparators to the
All right.
town list.
So I assume what I will want to do is team Amy up with some of you guys to do the school side benchmarking report. What I'll do is I'll try to put together an outline for what we're looking for. And that way you guys can say, okay, this is what the school side and municipal side will look like. We'll merge them together. We'll create one benchmarking report, come back here next month, pass it around, talk about it, see if there's anything we want to change, hopefully not, vote on it, and then we can publish the benchmarking report while we're moving forward on the other stuff. All right. Is there anything that you guys wanted to specifically discuss on anything you found or any questions you had?
Did you have anything, Angie? I mean, the towns that I did pretty much aligned with everything else, so we saw the data for the other towns last week. Did you see any significant outliers you wanted to bring up?
No, the one thing that I noticed was that special ed across the board is 5%.
Increase.
No.
No.
Oh, population.
Like,
Oh.
Of the
Oh,
budget.
really? 5% of the budget?
Yeah.
No
For every
kidding.
town,
right across the board.
Wow. Okay.
which is
No, that was, I'm sorry, it wasn't percent of the budget, it was percent of the population, I think. It was 5% across for every single one. It was like,
That's interesting.
why would that be?
it seems odd, right?
Yeah,
You look
very,
across, you're like, it's exactly the same.
very odd. And that must have been, that was population.
So that would be, that'll be something to bring up with the school administration and the special education coordinator. What are the incentives to identify children, and is there an unspoken cutoff? Like,
It was bizarre.
huh?
I mean, I'm sure it's rounded, obviously, up or
Right.
down,
But still, you look at the percentages for everything
5%.
else, they're all
Right.
yeah,
different.
they're all over the place. And it's hard, it's also hard sometimes to break out the cost for special ed.
Yeah.
Some budgets will have it as a line
Right.
item,
And others, it's all mixed in.
it's completely
Right. So how do
unidentifiable.
do all of the budgets identify the aids like as separate? Just being
Some of them are better than others.
Some are better
Okay.
than others, yeah.
okay.
I think another thing to think about within the school benchmarking is, I think, it's just my kind of view of it, compared to the municipal side, there might be a little bit more looking at softer things.
Okay.
Like outcomes.
Right.
Like beyond like graduation rates and MCAS scores, but how well do students thrive
Right.
in schools? Because that's something that's critical. Or
Right.
beyond the very basic minimum, what else are we giving our students?
Right.
Because I guess in my opinion, the very minimum is not enough.
Right.
And so when we're looking at some of those hard numbers, also trying to figure out a way to, and this probably would be more gauged through the interviews and stuff,
Right.
but how well are we preparing our students for the world, not just getting into college,
Right.
but
Right.
things like that. And how well are we catering to them? Are we able to provide alternative seating arrangements in classes to
Right.
optimize student learning, like that kind of thing.
Right. I'd be interested too in the mental health component of it. Do the kids have resources that they can go
Yeah.
to? Are we doing enough on that score? And then I'm sure we'll be told no, that we could always be doing more.
There's never enough.
Right,
but
right. That's sort of
Looking at
is,
the numbers, it all kind of looked, it was all reasonable.
okay.
I guess my question is, what costs are more than that 2.5%? Like, what costs can we just not hold down that just increase,
So,
without us
Right.
being able to do it? Because if we say we have 2.5% plus new growth, plus these other things that I don't understand, then our base is increasing by more than that if we're running out of money, so.
and that's one of the things that we're going to have to identify. And then, once we get to the end of this exercise through the school cost structure and the municipal cost structure, we put it back together with our revenue to identify what those cost drivers are and to try and figure out creatively, okay, are we doing enough to mitigate those factors, and what are the things that we can't mitigate, right? So what Jay will always point to is, well, there are costs that are mandated by the state that are unfunded, and the state is law bound to account for the costs that it imposes when it tells us to do X, Y, and Z, except by and large there's an exclusion for special education costs, and there's a whole circuit breaker thing that we'll get into, but at the same time, it's a cost driver. Health insurance. We are bound to provide it. It's negotiated for, but there are only so many providers. We were in the GIC for a while. Now we're not. We put it back out to bid. We saved a little money one time by moving it over, but it seems like we're sort of like we do it like people do it like a cable plan, like, okay, Comcast got expensive again, so I'm going back over to something else. And that's sort of the way it is for health insurance. Like, we were at the GIC, that saved us a lot of money. We got out of the GIC when the percentage increases became 6% annually. We hopped over to Harvard Pilgrim. We saved a little bit of money there when we hopped over, but now it's looking like, you know, those increases are about 6% per year. So those are going to be the things that we'll have to explain to people, like, look, this is the cost of running a town. So we'll get into all that. So let's talk a little bit about
Can
so
I-
Go
There's
ahead.
one other thing. The student population, the population that's students versus our total was on the high side.
okay,
Like and so if it's costing us, you know, $14,000 a student, and people are coming here for the schools, they're not probably paying $14,000 in taxes.
well, also at
And
the same
so
time,
we're like, we're increasing this population of people who want to come here because we have good school. I mean, I've
Right.
heard people say, especially with actually special ed,
Yes.
that our
Right.
special
Absolutely.
ed program is excellent, and so people want to come here. But if we're adding families, and then you have like 3 kids in a family,
Right.
and they're paying $8,000 in taxes,
Right.
and it's costing us $45,000 for them to be here.
well, one of the things we want to be cognizant of, it doesn't actually cost you $45,000 to bring 3 kids in. If you have, 22 kids in a class and 3 more kids walk into that class, the average cost per student in the class goes down because you've already paid for the teacher to be there, you've already built the school, you've already had the books and everything. But where's the tipping point? When you do get a lot of families move in, you see these population bubbles come through where all of a sudden Jay Cummings says, oh my God, we've got to hire a 6th grade English teacher because we've only got 2 and, we have 100 kids who are going to need to taught English next year. So that's, you see that at that point for staffing increases. So that's one of the cost drivers that we're going to have to determine, like, okay, what is the effect, and how can we manage that? How can we mitigate that a little bit better? I don't want to spoil the story, but what I've
Go ahead.
so what I've every time we have the discussion, what I'm told is, we're adding personnel because a couple different reasons. Number one, we add aides to a classroom. And I have parents that tell me, oh, I walked into a classroom, there's 5 adults standing around. Well, they're there for a reason. They're there for certain needs, and we'll have that special education talk. And then, there are population bubbles. Someone retires, someone else moves in, you have to hire somebody. And then there's, like you said, we don't want to do the bare minimum. I actually do want to hire an advanced placement physics teacher. We do want to concentrate on STEM, so there's a customer service aspect of it too. And certainly, the more kids you add, the more it's going to be expensive. So, how does that all work out? The school cost structure. Yeah, I volunteer you guys. Good luck. Good luck.
Well, the other thing to think about along with that is, our budget is to cover the bare minimum. We can't always do that because we won't advance.
Right.
But looking through some other school budgets, when they reevaluated the state funding, Grafton kind of came out on the short end of the stick there. Other towns did not.
Right.
And you read their forward letter to their budget. They say, we've got this huge windfall, but we're going to keep our budget the same. And here are some of the ideas we have on how we're going to improve things because we've got this huge excess of money.
Right.
And so they're not changing their budgets, and they're getting a lot more money from the town. So they're going to be improving things where we're going to be just struggling to maintain the status quo. So we need to think about how do we
Compete.
still have the best schools, the schools that we think are great, that are going to draw families to Grafton.
I hadn't thought of that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh man.
From what I recall,
I thought that.
Auburn was one of those schools that's, what do you call it? They get they get extra money back from the state that we don't get, minimal aid versus whatever.
Yeah.
Are there other towns aside from Auburn that fit that mold where they get extra more?
Well,
Towns around us?
the one I'm thinking of has to do with the way the state rejigged the calculation
Yeah.
recently. I don't know what it's called exactly,
Yeah.
but because I think it was
Foundation budget.
yeah, I think it was Ashland that highlighted it. I'll have to double check. I'm pretty sure it was Ashland that highlighted it.
Interesting.
There's we have tons of
I mean,
But
Worcester's
other
gonna,
towns having a windfall doesn't, I mean, it doesn't, they can do well and we can also do well. Like, we just have to figure
Yeah,
out
we just
how
have to
we're gonna
balance it.
stay
Right.
where we want to be.
one of the things that fascinated me with the last round of teacher negotiations was how do you measure market value for people in their jobs? If you graduate with a degree in chemistry and you do really well in school and you decide, okay, instead of going to Biogen in Cambridge, I want to be a teacher here. Some people would say, well, they should be paid whatever someone at Biogen would get paid for their degree. Well, we cannot afford to do that. But at the same time, it's not really an open market either, because there are only so many spots for that entry-level teacher. Or even to make it more complicated, if you worked here for a number of years and you're dissatisfied with your salary, where do you go? And it became a game of, okay, well, again, who are we comparing ourselves to? Do we compare ourselves to Westboro? Do we compare ourselves to Shrewsbury? They have more income than we do. So now that these towns are getting a little bit more money, it'll be interesting to see, okay, what's the response from that community? Are they going to invest in their personnel? And if they do, what does that say about us? And, where does that put us again? So it'll be an interesting few years on that. And, again, that's all part of, the school cost structure, ultimately the entire cost structure, because we're bound by Prop 2.5. And this year's budget will be 6.5% more. Is that what Tim was projecting? A 6.5% increase. And that's a lot more than the 3.2 that were allotted under Prop 2.5. And the reason we're able to do it is because of the 2014 override, and next year we won't have that. So something's got to give. We can chase other communities, we can chase that money, we can be competitive, but salaries are part of it. And it's unpopular to say, but there's no way around it.
Did you say the school was 6.5?
No, the overall
Overall?
municipal increase over last year.
I know the schools wanted more than they're going to go with,
Yeah, they were looking for,
4 or 5. They're about $1 million off.
I think they said someone's gonna yell at me, but it's been a long day. It was like a 5.95% increase, and I think that there's some conversation about offering them much less,
3.2.
3.2. Yeah, which would be the lowest that we've offered them since a decade ago. I think one time they got a 0% increase, and then like the year after it was like 7 or something like that, to have to make up for it, right? So there's no, you got to pay the piper, right? So, it didn't make a difference. They could have had 3.5 and 3.5 2 years in a row. And as the school side always points out to me, when you do take that decrease and say you cut, as assistant principal from Millbury Street, you can't play that trick again the next year. You can't cut another one. And you're not getting that guy back. So when you do get that funding back to the level it was, you're not rehiring that guy. You're maintaining that level at the cut level. So, school committee, by the way, is going to come to the Board of Selectmen soon, or the Select Board, and we'll have that discussion again. So that's coming up pretty soon. So who wants to be on the school side benchmarking? I'll put Amy's name down because she's going to be a point person for that. Anyone else? Who?
I can do it too.
You too? Okay. Great. I will try to be more organized and more available to people to help provide an outline.
So both of y'all, is that what y'all said?
Yep.
Plus Amy.
Yep. Okay, so moving on from benchmarking a little bit, let's talk about, since we're on school cost structure, let's talk about the school cost structure subcommittee. Would the 3 of you like to be on that again?
Sure.
Okay. I do envy you a little bit. I find Jay and Dan Gale just to be so forthcoming with
They're
information.
great to work with.
Anything that you need, they get for you, and they get it for you right away. I mean, I once joked that I could wake up at 4 in the morning and text Dan and ask for numbers, and he would get them to me at 4:01. He is that good. So that's good. All right, so that'll be the school cost structure committee. Municipal cost structure, Barry, what do you think? I mean, don't feel the need to jump into municipal, because we got a lot of committees here. You can do revenue, you could do capital.
And there's plenty of people we can volunteer for stuff.
That's true,
Because
yes.
they're not here.
I'm already doing the municipal cost structure.
Okay. So why don't we,
But I'd really like to get, it would be good if Laura and Martin could, because they've dug up budget books, et cetera, if they could go into those and add to that spreadsheet that's there.
yeah, we can have them do that.
If they could do that, then it would, that, in a sense, that would be all done.
Okay.
For the
So-
cost structure piece?
Yeah.
So,
Really, you take that spreadsheet and start knocking stuff out for a more
Right.
focused picture of the municipal cost structure.
so let's do Barry, Mark, Martin, and Laura. And there's 4 people on that because I feel like, as Craig always points out, it's 19 departments.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot. So there will be, and one of the things, again, to crib off of Newton a little bit, they helpfully provided updates as they were doing this, and with like little memos about what they were finding challenging and not. And they broke out how they went around gathering the information, who they talked to, and they wrote, the information and idea gathering phase is pursued to seek answers to the following questions. What opportunities exist to reduce short and long-term general fund municipal costs without reductions in service? What municipal costs should be supported by user fees rather than general taxpayer? What opportunities exist to promote greater utilization of tech? This was, by the way, this was 10 years ago, and everybody thought tech was going to save the world, and we were going to revolutionize City Hall with some apps. But so they have some ideas I'll pass along to, and I'll probably want to sit with you and Mark and go over the approach to the municipal side, because I'll tell you, you're going to receive a chillier reception than the school side will. It's tense.
Oh, I'm a fan of Rebecca and Tim.
Okay. Good.
I hope
They
the
are a fan
camera-
of yours.
I hope the camera's not on.
So, I'll just want to, and we'll chat about this offline, but, to the extent that there is a lot of data. I mean, they do a good job with the budget book. There's a lot of information out there. And you already know all this. So we'll be able to collect, I think, a lot of data and then approach them with a defined set of questions that we want to ask them about, just municipal costs and drivers and what their opinions are about what they're facing going forward. So what I don't want to do is have like random people firing them off emails,
Right.
because that'll be the first thing I hear from everybody who doesn't want to read this report ever, is you're harassing the staff.
Yes,
Right.
we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that. So let's me, you, and Mark can hop on a conference call about that. Revenue structure. So this one is, there's an opportunity here to be creative. When we talk about revenue, we're talking about taxes, we're talking about new growth, we're talking about fees, and, there is an opportunity to be a little bit more creative and think outside the box in terms of what revenue should be. So I'll sign myself up for that, because I haven't signed myself up for anything.
And I'm open, so I know
Right.
Mark said he's interested in revenue. I personally
Great.
am interested in revenue and decision and control.
All right, so me, you, and Mark will do revenue. Capital. This one's hard. Because there's, unlike straight up municipal costs on the operating side, there's not a lot of data about what the capital costs are, except for the information that CIPC gets every spring from the town administrator's office about what they want to do for capital. The school side does an excellent job of identifying their capital, but I would like to break that out from school cost structure. and see if we can find a pattern of use of capital resources that we can put into one report, both school side and municipal side.
So while we're doing the school, we can break that out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You want to just do it that way so that that can be a combination report?
A
Okay.
year or two ago, three maybe, Rebecca showed me an excellent spreadsheet that identified every capital project, big capital projects for the most part. Some legacy capital projects like the modulars over at North
Right.
Street. And the amounts we would have to pay, principal and interest, and the hit on the taxes, all the way across.
Yes.
After we renegotiated the debt structure with the bank, I don't know, it was an excellent idea. It was an opportunity to knock down the interest. I got a set of cost structure similar, not as good as what Rebecca had, but similar to what we had looked for. Here's the project, here's the money by year, principal plus interest all the way down. So that information exists.
Yeah, it exists, but it's not particularly well kept. So there's a few things that are going on with capital. First, there is no one centralized list of what is capital that is owned by the town. There's really not even a definition of what we are considering capital that it would be helpful to work off of. When the people that work in the buildings and in these departments have capital needs, basically what they do is they evaluate what their capital needs are. They report that to Tim. There used to be a list that will go to CIPC, and then they would come up with a scoring system among the CIPC members to determine priority, right? And that was what a lot of communities have done. A lot of other communities have said, well, you really want to keep track of capital because the longer you put off repair or replacement, the more it's going to cost you, right? So we saw that with the roads. So the longer you put off dealing with the road, the more likely it is you're going to have to rip it up and replace it, and that's more expensive. So if the idea behind capital maintenance is to save money in the long run, what you want to do is identify what the useful life is of a particular capital item, keep it on a schedule, and replace it once the useful life is off. We don't really have a method of doing that here. So if you ask a department head in a school, what's the deal with the carpet? He'll say, well, it should have been replaced in 1965. What do you mean, what's the deal? Or what's the deal with the HVAC system? Well, he's, an English teacher. What does he know? So I want to figure out, how are we going about identifying these? What's the process? And is the process help or a hindrance? Is it a feature or a bug to the system that we have going on? As Matt often, keeps identifying, our budget has gone from, 40 million to 50 million to 60 million over the course of the past 20 years. But we are only allotting about $1 million a year for capital improvement out of free cash. So that means that we're actually dealing with a smaller and smaller and smaller portion of capital as a percentage of our budget, which in theory is going to make things more expensive as time goes on. And part of my rationale for even wanting to do the GSC at all was because I know it's hard for me to go back to people and ask them for more money in an override, knowing that maybe we really don't have our eye on capital improvement as much as we should to save them money in the long run. So we'll want the people that we want to interview for that will include definitely Matt Often. He's got his finger on the pulse on this, and I know he was really disappointed about how town meeting turned out. And if we're going to make recommendations to change things, we really have to be able to articulate to people why. Because, I was there at town meeting, everybody was like, well, we've done this way forever. Big government trying to tell me how to run capital. So that one's gonna be challenging. So let's do it this way. Once we have school and municipal cost structure down, maybe we'll see where we are for capital and then start conducting interviews on that. So that, maybe that and decision and control structure we'll do after we
Who
do
would you like me to put down for that?
Put me and put Mark down, because I'll be interested to see how Mark handles it in Groton.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I think he'd have good insights.
Yep. And then, decision and control structure, let's leave that one until we get through the other ones. And I think that's it. So just in terms of action items, let me look at my schedule here. My wife has moved to Google Calendar away from the app that we used to use, and she hasn't linked her calendar to mine, so I have no idea what my obligations are at any given moment. Like, I'm like, what are we doing? Okay, so when do we want to get this draft benchmarking report done by? Is a month good? December 7th, Barry?
Yeah, I can try that.
All right. Let's, you, me, and Mark. Are you around on the weekends?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Most, yeah.
December
Sure.
7th is a Saturday.
All right. So we'll say, let's give our,
Let's look at that calendar one more time.
we'll give ourselves to December 9th. Let's say. Let's you, me, and Mark see if we can get together on the weekend of the 16th to talk about how we want to write it.
Talk to Amy.
Yeah.
So you're saying a meeting on December 9th and one on December 16th?
No, actually, let me strike that December 9th idea, because that's a Monday. I don't think anyone's going to want to meet on a Monday. Would you guys want to meet on, like, are Thursdays good? I mean, we only have half the people here, so they're not great.
Are you talking to Barry about the
No,
benchmarking?
all
Or
of
sorry,
us.
All of us
All of
as
us,
okay,
yeah.
for a meeting?
In general,
For a meeting in about 1 month's time?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, Thursday is
Thursday
I
better
can
work
make it
for
work
me.
personally,
because it
but
gets away from finance committee meetings.
And I know we're getting into the holiday season, so I don't want to put it too close to,
when is FinCom? What did you say?
Usually on Thursday.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. So long as.
No, Wednesday. Usually Wednesday.
Like the
it's
12th maybe?
Wednesdays, okay.
yeah,
December 12th.
Not too close to Christmas?
not too close to Christmas.
What date you said?
December 12th?
12, okay.
And that's the meeting where we want the benchmarking reports complete
Yeah.
for discussion.
Right.
Here.
And I think that if any questions arise between now and then, we can, just have a couple phone calls or a quick coffee meeting. We don't have to bring the whole group in.
So December 12th, the benchmark report will be written,
Will be written and presented to this board.
which
for-
means before that, we are going to meet on that?
Yes. So before that, we can meet in subcommittees. So you and Mark will meet on the weekend of the 16th, hopefully. Get some writing done.
December 16th.
No, November 16th.
December 12th.
No, November 16th.
November 16th.
Yes.
And just sorry, a question from a newbie to town committees.
Mhm.
Is there a specific format
No.
that an official report has to be in?
No.
Okay.
No. All right. And then, let's see. Probably, what we'll do is I'll reach out to the people in the subcommittees about a schedule for possible subcommittee meetings, because we do want to assign people work that way, for subcommittee work. So I'll include you, Mark, Martin, and Laura in an email, Barry. And then, the three of you have your marching orders. I think you understand where to go with the school cost structure stuff. All right. If there's any questions at all, just give me a holler.
How critical is the timing? I'm thinking between getting a benchmarking report prepared and doing all this during a holiday season?
Not incredibly. I just wanted to give people
I think to have everything done by December 13th.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean,
Yeah.
we should have started on this a long time ago. It just got delayed, so it's just the timing hasn't been fantastic so far. So I apologize for the holiday season. And if people find that, you know, look, we want to conduct interviews, but the holidays are getting in the way, then, you know, we push it. But
Yep.
I'll also have people to answer to on the select board, and they'll want to know where we're at. So
So we'll do the best that we can.
do the best we can. A for effort. We're all volunteers. All right. Anything else?
Do we have a time of day for that benchmark meeting on a Saturday?
No, let's, I can't, you know.
Mark's gotta get included at some point.
Yeah, at some point, you know, poor Haddad is like, we're planning his weekend of the 16th.
Just been signed up for.
Is there a Patriots game on? You might cancel.
If there is, like, we could do
Football
it during the
matters,
Patriots
so
game.
things
Not on
to
a
take into
Saturday.
consideration.
It's college football. We'll just put it on a TV, we'll get some beers, do some benchmarking. That's how we roll. That's how we roll. I don't rake leaves, I do benchmarking.
Did we want to make a motion to adjourn?
I will entertain such a motion.
Second.
All right, motion made and seconded. All in favor? Aye.